Thanks so much for the invitation to be here today. Um, really appreciate it. It's exciting to get to interact with a whole new set of people. I would love to sort of know like who I'm chatting with today. So if you all wouldn't mind, I mean, I'm sure you've been in many sessions where you've done introductions. I've just not been there, but if you wouldn't mind and just introduce yourself, at least in the chat, that would be great. Then I can kind of know like where folks are coming from um, and why they're here. And we'll have some times to chat during the talk as well. So I'll kind of go ahead and get started. I want to acknowledge first the sense of place, the place that I am speaking from in the moment, even though we're all sort of in the virtual space together, is Wabanaki lands, and I acknowledge that connection and their current and ongoing struggle to gain the rights and recognition owed to them. Or currently, our state is looking at. Or considering a legislation to help do this, but it's been a long time in the works and not enough action. I also, whenever I sort of think about the virtual space as well, I think that also affords an acknowledgement of sorts, because I think it's a space that gets to bring all of us together in a really, from all places in the world and the country. But also for some, it's not a source of liberation connection. For some, it's a source of bullying and self-image concerns and et cetera. And so I just like want to hold that contradiction close as we think about the various contradictions that exist. So I was invited to talk a little bit about data justice, or what some of us in our community are calling data science for social justice. And I think, I mean, it's an area, it's a theme, but it's a movement. And so I'm just showing just a few of the programs and workshops that have happened just over the last year, 18 months, that has been really important in helping accelerate this movement. And in particular, I'm sort of speaking not just generally data science for social justice, because there's a long history of computer science being, very involved in science and technology studies, but rather a sort of a newer voice to this conversation, which is the mathematics community. And I'll go through a little bit of like some backstory for that, because I think some folks might be like, wait, but isn't data science math? And yes, it's complicated and there are cultural barriers. I also want to say, like, disclaimer, I had a really hard time choosing like, a couple of projects to show you what this looks like a little bit in deep dive. But this community is doing some really amazing, broad, phenomenal work. And so like, if I know of any projects that might be interesting to you, or if you have any like thoughts about, hey, is anything going on in this area? There might be something, I don't know, but there's a lot of projects and a lot of people and getting involved. So I think it's really exciting. A little bit about me. This is sort of a smorgasbord introduction. I'm from the northeastern United States. I'm currently in Maine, but grew up in southern New England. My father is from Peru, so he immigrated like almost 60 years ago. And my mother's from the New England area. And so at the time that I grew up, the Northeast was not a huge sort of mecca that people would think in their heads about Latino immigration. Certainly, I have a lot of family who immigrated to California, but it is part of a legacy that I've always been really proud of. And so I hope a little bit of that comes out today. I've been involved in a lot of different kinds of projects, whether data-oriented, community building oriented, at the sort of center of both. And I think a lot of that comes from my own background in biology. So I was trained as a mathematical and computational biologist, which just means that I would use the tools of mathematics and computer science to investigate questions in the natural world. And the kinds of questions I was really interested in were around networks. So how neurons work together, how plants and pollinators create these beautiful, diverse, and sustainable communities together. And so you may see that there's like this underlying sort of thread of networks or ecosystem thinking that pervades even how I think about sort of creating research spaces. That's just a little bit of who I am. Sometimes I say I'm a mathematician by degree, but I have a lot of other sort of passion areas. I think you can probably tell, why did I get involved in social justice? Because that's just what I had to navigate. It was really just me making sense of my personal experiences. You know, that the Spanish-speaking Catholic church that my dad attended was just such a different world than the sort of Baptist New England church that my mom attended. I think that is like one of the many sort of boundary spanning or system ways that I was kind of thrown into multiple worlds, and then also thinking about, how do I navigate this? What does this mean? Why are they different? What is this underlying current here that, why are these two communities never together, except in my household? And I think that kind of work, whether it be, advocating for immigrant rights in Rhode Island that my dad was really involved with, that kind of evolved. I got really involved in high school in LGBTQ activism. I got really involved in my undergraduate career, also in continued activism, not just with LGBTQ, but also with other Latino students, and trying to find a place for us on campus and celebrate our culture and heritage and languages. And then when I went to graduate school, it was a little different. It was more like the things that were confronting me at the time was I loved teaching, and was graduate school a place to do that? Well, in theory it was, but I was getting a lot of had children. So that was like one of the things that I had to spend a lot of time on, was how to navigate graduate school as a mother. And so I think, social justice issues have always been part of my life. I think what I'm going to talk about today is how that part of my life, instead of just being an undercurrent of how I experience the system, ended up becoming a place that I could use the mathematical tools and computational tools that I had learned to sort of merge those worlds together a little bit more. Okay, so I've kind of been talking around it, but haven't really talked about it yet. I want to talk a little bit about what data science is. And so I think there's a lot of definitions. I'm going to be very not too technical and very broad with my description of data science, which is just broadly a set of tools that's around obtaining, storing, processing, sense making, visualizing large amounts of data. And often these large amounts of data are also continually updating. If you think about all of the things that we have that monitor data in various ways, phones, appliances, et cetera. So there's just like, how do you even handle that amount of data? And then how do you even make insights from that amount of data? And I'm talking specifically about how I've been working to get the mathematics community involved more in this area. And what I mean by that is that while in our heads, we might kind of have a good idea that data science techniques involve a lot of mathematics, many mathematicians, at least of my generation, and earlier for sure, never were required to take any classes involving data. And you might be like, wait, but data, isn't that the most important part of math? Well, that is kind of like statistics, and math is this more theoretical, okay, if we had data that looks like this, how might you do this? But it was not really like applied with data. So getting the mathematics community involved with data science has also meant not just the big sort of fancy data science, but also just getting comfortable working with data, learning how to code in Python or R or something like that, and you know, doing things like thinking about visualization and all sorts of other things. So when I talk about data science work, the gambit of projects that fall under this are all the way from very sort of fancy, typical data science and machine learning and to, you know, some basic, like, we need to get some data, and like that takes a lot of manual labor, and sometimes we're just thinking about how to structure that data set well for the questions we want to ask. Data science has been an emerging discipline. It's pretty hot. I think like maybe now the new like hot code word is AI. But you know, it's really sort of, again, a continuum. You know, one of the areas of data science is machine learning. A lot of that is you know, drives into those large language models that are sort of the basis of a lot of the public interest in artificial intelligence. So it's really all related. It's kind of same thing, different words in different senses. And, you know, even just as of a couple of years ago, you know, data scientist was considered like the sexiest job of the 21st century. And mathematics was contributing a large level, or those with mathematics degrees were contributing highly to this field. So it's something that from a professional perspective, you know, we have to be more aware of. But I think the other thing we have to be really aware of, and I'll sort of disclaimer this data by saying that it seems gender binary, but I think the thing we have to be aware of is how this field is shaping. So, you know, as of, you know, this study just in 2020, data scientists, you know, it says 82% were men. And so what does that mean for the kind of work that gets done in this field? Whose views are represented or considered? Who is really shaping that science in that field? And it goes beyond gender, but also we can look at race and ethnicity. You know, just compared to even other computer science fields, the representation of Latinos, African Americans, and though, you know, not represented here and erased, I assume also Indigenous folks are just highly underrepresented in data science versus even so many of these other subfields of computer science. And so we just really have to pay attention to how this field is emerging, and how do we interrupt a force, right? Because this is a story repeated in history over and over again. These hot fields emerge, and they're really only accessible to a particular type of student for various reasons. So I think of data science for justice and mathematics. I think of this kind of data justice work as serving maybe three really important roles in our community. And I think one is probably the one that most folks are thinking of. You know, we want to be able to contribute to this broader conversation and impactful work on global, you know, social justice, of course. I think a second piece is to shine a mirror on ourselves and be able to narrate our own stories. And I think that's really important as well. And lastly, I think that these norms of how fields emerge and who gets to do this, I think those should be challenged. And I think an emerging field is exactly the place where we have the opportunity to make new visions reality for what things could look like and how research spaces, for example, or training spaces, educational spaces could be. So I'll kind of just like pause for a moment. And I wonder if like there is this bit about norms in your own fields and workplaces that you wish had been challenged, or that you would love to think about something new there. Like, what would you like to do ideally in your workplace? I'm just sort of curious as to the answers there. And I'll pause just for a moment so folks can reflect on that. You can raise your hand, or you can put in the chat or whatever. Yeah, oh, many, right? Many. Trust, yeah. Oh, equity and equality. Oh, yes, yeah. Different things. Yeah, what is fair? Yeah. Yeah, no, I love the idea also that you said trust, because that's something I think of a lot, coming from this like plant pollinator systems. I've really thought about trust as like loyalty or building for each other and cooperation. Um, and so, yeah, totally. Data pools, control, and access. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Access to that data is uneven, not equitable often, right? Not even equal, never mind equitable. Yeah, I really think that there is this have and have nots of data. We saw this a lot. The digital divide was something that came up a lot, but I think, you know, the data divide is also a term that we use a lot as well. And so it's not just an intersection of who has the skills, it's like who has the access to this data to begin with. Yeah, yeah, about our own institutions. Like, we want to do well as an institution. How can we do well if we don't even have the data or access to the data? I agree. Give me the, I promise I take good care of the data. I think there's some really cool places doing some nice forward work on this. UC system, the Cal State system has done some access with data, but I still understand that like right now, some of the finer level data is only accessible like if you take a particular course that's like a data stewardship of this data and you know, pilot programs and stuff. And so yeah, yes. I think there's a lot of different yeah, I think this resonates, hits a chord with people for sure. Yeah, 17 institutions managing data, that's a lot. So here's like some of the pillars in which we were trying to build our new field around data science. One, we wanted to create a community that was diverse or reflected the richness of the communities that we purport to serve in social justice. So just sort of, you know, the numbers that we just saw don't have to be this way. They can be more inclusive. It can be more interdisciplinary. We wanted it to be collaborative. We wanted to be able to share opportunities, collaborate. Trust is a big word. Build that trust. Avoid reinventing the wheel. I feel like we waste a lot of time when we're really competitive in science because we're you know, two people might be working on the same thing. Well, wouldn't it be better if those two people were working together and learning from each other's work? I think. Supportive. You know, we understand the realities of what it means to be at least an academic researcher or be on the track to you know, getting your PhD or an advanced degree. And these research communities are involved, especially ones with social justice, attract a lot of young early career scholars. And those folks need to be able to publish. They need to be able to get jobs. Like that's a reality. And so how do we provide publication outlets that will see their work as legitimate? How do we come together for each other to write letters of recommendation or nominations for awards. I mean, I think that there's a larger sort of ecosystem that's academic that has its own set of norms that has decided whether to recognize this work as legitimate or not, and we have to be conscientious of that. And I think this is, I have a good colleague, Nathan Alexander, who's now at Howard, and he's just, I feel like he like sits on my shoulder often and is like, okay, but how is this going to make a difference in reality, a material difference today? Like, this is not just theoretical social justice work, but this is like work that's actually going to make a difference. And my own view on sort of leadership in this community is like, if you provide these right spaces, then we're going to thrive together, and we're going to have a multitude of leadership. And I think probably Equity Unbound sort of, this is probably, just speaking to the choir here. I think this is definitely what my own institute, Rios, really thinks about. We specialize specifically in STEM. I think it's about like giving people that space where they can be their whole selves and offering the opportunity for leadership, and it's just a great time. And I think that it's more than just bringing a collective together that's going to be tied together through a listserv. Like, I really think about this in very complicated, okay, it's not just we're going to bring people together and tell them how it's going to be. We're not going to just have people contribute a bunch of talks, but we're going to actually make something together. We're going to make an entire field together. We're going to make new norms together. And so I think of this as really, really interactive and transformational work. And I kind of hold in my head pictures like this. So this was a picture at a SECNAS Leadership Institute Fellows reunion. And I think about why aren't all our spaces so diverse like this? It's not that the people don't exist, they're just excluded. And so these are my goal pictures. This is how I want, this is who I want involved in shaping math and data science and so forth. And how can I make a place that's joyful like this? This is one of our participants, Shikini Kuaba. She just was awarded an HHMI Gilliam Fellowship, which is sort of incredible. There's not many of those given to mathematicians. And she was like, I had no idea math could be joyful like this. And so this is her in the sort of final 4 weeks that we first 4 weeks that we spent together in Providence, doing karaoke. We all came up with this acronym for ourselves. It was kind of a joke at first, and then it just fit. So it's DAM with 4 A's. And I hope I remember what all 4 A's stand for, but it's data analysis, advocacy, activism, and applied mathematics network. And we say it is kind of okay, the good part about this is that we then had a DAM Slack, and we had a DAM folder and a DAM Google Drive. And so it's just kind of made for a lot of funny moments. But I think that's the point. When you go to these research spaces and they're okay, let's have fun with this. Let's have joy with this, instead of, okay, let's focus on the paper and not introduce each other first. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the ways that we are also sort of calling bullshit on our own practices, but using these data and computation tools. And so I think a lot about this sort of framework of calling bullshit, which is you might recognize this book cover, Carl Bergstrom and Jevin West. Before they put out a book, they put out an OER curriculum, also called Calling Bullshit. It's a callingbullshit.org. And I've been using this to teach for the last 6 years. And I try to teach my students these skills, and I gotta be not afraid to call bullshit also in the world around me, not just tell my students to do that. So when I moved to Bates 6 years ago, so I was at another college for 8 years, we were doing a lot of background reading, thinking about, okay, I had moved to Bates, and I'd moved to Bates in particular to start this interdisciplinary and inclusive computer science and digital studies program. And at the same time that I moved, which was in the fall of 2018, there was a set of reports by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Mathematics, and Medicine rather, that came out. One committee produced 2 reports, each report going through a feedback process and being published. For those who are familiar with National Academies reports, typically a committee that's convened around some issue like undergraduate education and data science typically only produces one report. So it's unusual for do an interim report and a consensus report, but that's what happened here. So it's not to be confused with a report that then gets feedback and then is published. It's literally 2 reports. The interim report had a lot of sort of questions, kind of state of being, and here's some things we should follow up on. And the consensus report was just a little bit more final in nature, here are the recommendations that we want to have here. When I was at a meeting, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and we had this conversation about the report. And it seemed like we were talking past each other a little bit. I said, so I'm gonna pause and just have you look at this table of contents for a moment. And the table of contents in the interim report and the table of contents in the final report. What do you notice? What do you wonder? Yeah, Veronica, progressive to being current state of the field. And what's that sort of progressive feeling that comes off of the interim report? Yeah, in the future and broad participation. Yeah. So you can kind of notice there's a little bit of color coding here. So you can kind of see, okay, intro, acquiring data, science skills and knowledge for data scientists. There's orange, but there's no green. There's nothing that's remotely sort of equivalent in the table, in the broad high-level table of contents, to an entire chapter of broadening participation in science. Broad participation is a little bit of a National Science Foundation term, broadening for but of course we could critique that as well, and I think that's a good thing to critique. So I was having this conversation with this colleague, and they were like, oh, have you seen the report? And I was like, oh yeah, I saw the report. Gave feedback on it, and I thought it was really great. They had a whole chapter on broadening participation, and they were like, no, they didn't. And I was like, what? And I'm sure I read the report. I'm sure it had an entire chapter. So when I got back, I realized, oh, this is unusual. They have two reports, and I was talking about the interim, and they were talking about the final report. So at first I was very depressed, and then I was like, okay, well, let's be logical about this. Maybe, if I try to like imagine what is like the best, sort of the nicest thing to imagine here about this report, maybe what I can say is that they infused broadening participation and issues of equity throughout the entire report. I mean, certainly that's possible, right? And so I did some deep dive, like where are these things that were talked about in broadening participation? Where were they represented elsewhere in the report? And while it looks like, some subsections remain subsections in other chapters, a lot of them sort of lost even the sort of equity component. So for example, institutional partnerships had this opportunity to think about broadening participation to underserved students and marginalized students through like partnerships with community colleges. And that like, instead it became sort of partnerships for transfer into these programs or things like that. Broadening participation as a header was like a subheader under data science. And so this is where like the term of participation, broad participation, kind of comes in. So I think like, because it's just framed in terms of broadening participation, it's good enough to just recruit diversely. And then that's going to somehow like be enough, right? And while that header was sort of demoted, other headers were promoted up into their full evaluation and assessment. And so I think, this says something about where we think broadening participation or progressiveness should be. Okay, maybe I'm being too hard. Maybe this is like not, and this isn't a true mapping. Are there other things we can do? So I collaborated with a colleague of mine who's in my department. She's a digital humanist, and her area is originally in history, but she has this like really interesting research program to sort of that spans techniques and very thoughtfully thinks about data that is there and data that isn't there. And sometimes those are more important. And I asked her, like, is there a way to really go through the report and think about it from this like computational text analysis perspective? Like, can we say like, this is not just us and our, qualitative coding version of what we see going on, but can we also use other techniques that are a little more quantitative and computational to sort of further explore what's going on? So we did that. We did sort of like what I guess is equivalent in computational language to sort of a thematic analysis based on this like of another report that was contemporary and written right about the same time. And that was really focused on equity and inclusion and justice. And so we used that report as like, okay, here are some keywords that are really important to noticing these commitments in or language that's used for these broadening participation and justice-focused commitments. And that gave us like sort of a keyword list. We're going to call that like JEDI keywords for short. So justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Then we took the two reports, the final versions of each report, and we prepped that to make it into like Word data. So, taking off all of the punctuation, things like that. And then we even analyzed, if you treat each word sort of differently versus diverse and diversity as sort of the same word group. So we call that stemmed words. So word stems. And we looked at, first we just did a quick, like, okay, counts, like in terms of counts or relative frequency. Like, what do we notice about the frequency of these words being used, et cetera? What words are there? What words are missing? We also looked at how words were connected to each other. This helps you think about making connections across themes, but it also helps you understand how central certain ideas through words are. I think that, you know what? I somehow eliminated this slide where it has the results. Oh, no, there it is. Okay. Okay. So, here's the results, and I'll explain, don't worry. So on the left, you see sort of like a bar chart. So what we did is we took that and all of the sort of Jedi words that are used in that interim report with the frequencies that they were used. And we said, imagine that you just like basically like wrote a longer report, but with those sort of word frequencies, and you just randomly like put words in, Jedi word, not Jedi word. Like what randomly assembled reports could you get out of that? And so you can see there's kind of a distribution because, you might have some random edits one way or the other, right? But this is sort of like, okay, randomly, this is what you might see. And you'll see the kind of maximum or the high center median is right around 650. The blue line is what the final report actually had in terms of frequency for Jedi words. So we're not even talking that like this is so far left of the desired outcome that it just can't happen by probability or by chance. Like this dilution was real. I think there are other sort of quick numbers to drop. The overall frequency of Jedi words dropped by a third. On the sort of top list of words that were dropped included diverse or diversity, et cetera. So that was like one of the top 5 words that dropped in frequency. We also looked at the word networks and centrality, and you can kind of tell a little bit visually that the sort of the pink dots that were all really in that cloudy center in the interim report in the top graph, you can see they're kind of more spread out in the final network. So there isn't this sense of centrality. I mean, that's probably, in large part because you got rid of an entire chapter, but it also says that even if you got rid of it, if you're really infusing it throughout, it might have been connected to a lot of different ideas. I think there's potential for it to be those Jedi language to be connected to a lot of different ideas, and here it was diluted. So I think this is like a moment where we say, oh, broadening participation is important. In fact, it was part of the charge for the National Academies to, that they were supposed to examine broadening participation in their reports. But in the end, as much as it was like said in the interim as, okay, this is something we should pay attention to, the end was definitely not that. So we get like, oh yeah, it's important, but not that important. And I feel like it's really important to building the kind of program that my colleague and I are trying to build at Bates. And so I love this quote from Gloria Anzaldúa that sort of says, like all people, we perceive the version that our culture communicates. Like it's not enough to just say I'm important, but we're also molded by all of these things like policy reports that say like are we worth or not, and we often get these opposing message, and that causes this cultural collision, this choque. So I think like my next question for you all is like, how do you resolve that choke? Are there places in your life where, and I'm sure there are, where there's like one thing said and another thing done, or one thing valued, but in one place and devalued in others? And so I think we already sort of talked about a lot of these, but I would invite you to also sort of share those choques, or share like how you deal with them. And so I think that one of the things I'm trying to demonstrate here is that through this data justice work, one thing that folks are doing are showing the existence of these choques. They're using data as a tool. I'm a big sort of mixed methods person, so I also use these other narratives in the qualitative work, but I think it, when complemented with the data and computational work, I think it's a really strong argument together. And then I feel like the next step is like, okay, once you show existence, like you also have to show resistance. Like, what does it mean to build something new? And some colleagues may have heard me talk a little bit before about sort of this idea of open as resistance, really thinking about, opening this report up to examination, the database, like making it available, making the study available. We're starting to talk about things that we don't talk about. Maybe somebody on a committee building a report like that or similar might have this sort of revising out of JEDI happening often. And so but if we don't talk about it, how do we know that this is a process that is going on in multiple committees? Because we don't want to, upset the donors or something, I don't know, whatever kind of, or the scientific community or whatever it is that's used as these straw man arguments. So how do we open that conversation? How do we use these open approaches? How do we get this conversation out there? And expose it, and then also act and do something different. I have a colleague who said, I want to create ways to get into the systems of power. So I think like the next level is like, what does it mean to do impactful work? So not just exposing, but like making a difference. I'm going to pivot a little bit here to say a little bit about Maria Jose. So Maria Jose is originally from Bolivia, but immigrated to the U.S. Several years ago now, a few years ago now, and immigrated to Providence, where I grew up. And when I was on my sabbatical in Providence, I really wanted to do is work back in my own Latinx community in Providence. And so I got connected to this Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council, who had recently put together this community leadership program with a special emphasis on a neighborhood along the river in Providence that is continually flooded and flooded in ways that are honestly, frankly, deadly because of built-up dioxins contamination in the river, as well as a combined sewer infrastructure that literally brings sewage into the streets of these immigrant rental neighborhoods. And we met with a couple of the leaders of this program, Nuevas Voces. And this program, even though it was ideated by WRWC as a nonprofit watershed council, the graduates of the first cohort became facilitators and creators of the subsequent cohorts. So it's just really a great sort of leadership development program that's now run by the community. And I was, I kind of said, like, what arguments, can we help you make that like people don't believe you because you don't have the quote unquote data? You have the experience, but you don't have the quote unquote data. And there's some sense of like power with data. And Maria Jose like got it right away. She's like, I want to work with you mathematicians because I know that that is a form of power, and I want to create ways to get into the systems of power. So like, what does that mean to turn that data over to those? And I think folks already sort of said something about what that means in the academic context, turning it over to students, turning it over to faculty, to anybody in the community for examination. People don't like to be that vulnerable, but I think it's really needed. So this is the first sort of intense workshop meeting. This is Jenny and Maria Jose, who are the two facilitators. And there have been a lot of people involved in Vecina. This is just, a subset of the first sort of research cohort, but we've had probably about 30 to 40 people involved with this program so far, doing various pieces, sort of getting involved. One of them, for example, Jenny is her day job is as a nurse in the children's hospital. And she was saying that families just don't know where to go for health care, don't know their rights in terms of health care. And so like, what does it mean to like turn this data over to the communities in the ways that they need it? So it's not just about, okay, look it up, does it exist? But like, how do you make it clear and communicate like in the way that they need it communicated, in Spanish? You can't see here, but we even have like an audio button and a description below. You have these sort of visual guides about what languages are supported on site. You can kind of go and try to find some healthcare facilities near you. And so like, how do these systems get designed when it's not the typical like user that things are designed for, but when it's designed for the Latino community, how are those fundamentally different? I think this has been a really interesting project to work on. The team that focused on medical data also published two op-eds, one about health insurance access and the other about bilingual healthcare, where they did a full analysis of the ratio of healthcare providers that spoke Spanish in this Providence area, and compared it sort of to national norms, as well as sort of like what should be the availability of Spanish-speaking doctors. There's also been a lot of other tools that we've developed. And even though we kind of started with them as a sort of an emphasis on environmental justice and flooding, we quickly realized as we were sort of putting out urgent fires, like, okay, like Jenny's really thinking about who's coming into the emergency room that day and how we can do better for them. Now Jenny's thinking about her, a new family that just immigrated in and has to pick a junior high school to enroll in, and how do they know that junior high school is going to be the best one for that child? And spoiler, like none of them are actually good, and that also gets exposed. So this is part of a broader sort of like, what does it mean to make real impact and get that data into the hands of others? And then finally, what does it mean to like take that work and put it into the classroom? So the National Academies study, we actually developed Annalise and I developed an educational module that actually appears in our class on network analysis to teach people how to do analysis of texts. Vecina project has been a partner organization for a community engaged learning class that I teach. And we talk about design justice and open practices for data and professional practices in client computer development. And so I think like each of these things that we're doing is not just about research, but then also about, okay, like how do we not just influence the community, but how do we also change that community in everyday classrooms as well? So I think that's like a really exciting front that this work is also going to. So I think like, a question for you and what we could kind of end on is, what what problems do you have that you think data could be important? How could you bring these ideas into your classroom? What would you need? What would you need to feel empowered in this space? So with that, I'm just going to say a quick thank you. And yeah, I would love to chat more.